My name is Jussi Sorsimo. I work for the regional development company Culminatum Innovation, and Culminatum is partnering both of these European projects, Proud and DA, and that's one reason I'm standing here. We promised about the panel discussions. I think we have earned that we open up the discussion at this point. So what I'd like to have the panelists back there. So naturally we have the Brenton and Neil, we have Pekka, and then we have Antoinette. Please join the panel, so they can reflect on that. And then we have a designer, Schneider, from France. You haven't heard Jean yet speaking a few words about him. Jean is promoting design in France, so he works for the agency of promotion creative industries. And he has also a background in Finland. He's been a design professor in Aalto University or University of Art of Design some years ago. So now it's nice to have you back again in Finland. You'll be visiting here many times. Okay, first it would be nice that if we reflect on the case, the keynote speakers, if you could, what kind of things came up into your mind when you heard Antoinette's case? And then please, the questions, the things you want to ask from the morning session, we will take those also later on, so you have a chance to ask. But please, Brendan, for example, if you would start. What do you think about Eindhoven's case?
Yes, I mean, I think the case demonstrates the value of bringing design skills to looking at problems in a different way. I guess the thought that I had when I was listening was about scale. Using these methods to sort of solve problems at a neighborhood level and resolving them is a very intensive process. So I guess there are two elements to it. How can you start to build skills in the community so that they can do this more themselves? So it doesn't have to become a design-led process, but lighter touch. But secondly, how can you actually start to find some of the common problems in a community that you can take these solutions from one location and use them in other parts of the community and other cities and so on, which raises a different challenge, I think, one that we're certainly facing in our work, which is how can you design solutions that respond to people's problems in an area and take them to a new location without having to revalidate whether these are the same problems. For example, turning family by family into a McDonald's and just sort of plonking it down in new cities, we fail the same test that we have of other sort of solutions that have come before. So somewhere between finding out what you can replicate so that you're not doing everything from scratch every time, but retaining some ability to contextualize and to focus on the the specifics of a particular location. So that was all running through my head when I was listening.
Hope that we find by these solutions we find a way we can put it into the other neighborhoods. I think like the website, it fits everywhere.
Yeah.
So we think it's very important that's neighborhood based. So we think you have to make a website, but with the same base for every neighborhood. But people find the citizens of that neighborhood on that website and not whole Eindhoven, because then it doesn't work anymore. But I think it can be easy put in other neighborhoods. So. But the one for the neighborhood near the forest is a bit difficult because you have to have that kind of neighborhoods, of course.
So that's a good example. The website, the platform is replicable, but actually the way it gets used is very specific.
I'd like to make two comments based on the presentations we've had so far, and on my insights or experience, modest experience on these kind of issues. The first comment is that it's a bit cynical, maybe, but I'd like to have this kind of co-design approaches or participatory design approaches applied also to the other types of problems that our society is confronted to, especially in the last 3 years. For instance, how do you make businesses pay their taxes? You'd be surprised to notice how many businesses in France don't pay their social security taxes. And I'm not talking there of the businesses who are in trouble. It's not at all this reality. It's big multinationals who tend to forget to pay for years. That's one thing. How do we make people who are wealthy and own quite a few flats accept to rent them? So the problem of homeless is also the problem of empty flats. It's not only the lack of availability of flats. So I'd like to see these approaches, focusing also on this segment of the population. And I'm always wondering why we don't tackle this. But that's one point. Another point is raised by the examples we've had so far, is the connection. To me, it's an open question, is the scaling, as you said, but which in relation to sustainability and in relation to technology. What I mean by that is that, well, you've used the word neighborhood. The neighborhood is both a geographical fact, the fact that you are at a certain distance, call it walking distance or whatever, but it's also a symbolic sense of belonging. And maybe we call this a territory, because to me it's both a neighborhood and its symbolic value. And the territory has its own regulation, and we're trying to restore this regulation. We try to make neighbors talk to each other. We try to make me help my neighbor pick up her apples, or things like that. So the regulation has always existed because it's the vitality of the social link that makes it. It's not laws. And that's one side, and we're working on that, obviously, through these examples. The other side is the government. And the government has, or seems to be driven by a vision of what is the ideal society, how you should behave, what you are entitled to have, what you should do properly. So we have on one side a normative vision of things which actually drove the whole institutions like social security and pension system. This is the minimum you are entitled to have. And we're realizing that this doesn't work really well. On the other hand, we realize that the neighborhood links have been destroyed for different reasons. And I'm wondering, it's really an open question for me, how far, the top-down approach, even if it's revamped by co-design, by kind of grassroots approach, is sustainable on the long term. So these are the questions that come to my mind.
Maybe I should start by responding, perhaps. They're big questions. Some initial thoughts. Yes, I agree that in a lot of respects we're actually trying to restore design, restore, recreate some of the ways we used to cooperate as families, as neighbours, as communities, in a way that has been overlooked for the last 50 or 60 years. And again, it's probably another Charles Leadbeater quote, we talked about a lot of social innovation is about trying to recreate in a post-industrial society pre-industrial models of cooperation, sometimes with technology and websites, but ultimately the software is people, and how do we relate to each other as individuals. Something about sustainability, which I didn't really touch on in my examples, where I didn't mention explicitly, is one thing that we look for in the solutions that we develop are that they have this notion of being generative. That is, the more people that go through the solution, the more resources you have to work on the solution. So the more families that go through family by family, the more potential mentors you have to work in the community. So often top-down solutions, if you want to create, you know, the nth sort of service, you want to create an extra officer, you have to find the budget for that extra officer. What we're finding is the more that these services run, the longer they run, the more readily the resources become available. And I explained the other night in the hotel, we budgeted for recruitment to find these families. And we found that in reality, the amount we need to spend on recruitment is practically zero because they find, A, families hear about this, but B, the families are really, really good at finding where the resources are in the community. So, so we're starting to see that notion of generative solutions coming out of our work. Whether it's sustainable in the really long term, we will see. But what we are seeing is families effectively graduating through this program. We've had seeking families, that is the ones who are looking for help, moving into becoming sharing families, so they're becoming mentors. At the same time, we're actually seeing sharing families going off and going back to university and doing psychology degrees and community development degrees, and they're actually potentially now going to be the people that will take this model forward in future. But I think having that vision, not just for scale in terms of size, but sustainability in terms of how do you build this into the mesh, the fabric of the community so that this just becomes the way we do things.
Yeah, well, first of all, some notions on the Eindhoven case. I think I found it quite interesting, and I would maybe like to study that a little bit more about how you use BrainPort as a tool in between, how they were kind of helping you to make it possible, because this is one of the problems when the public sector goes out looking for new services or trying to find people who are able to deliver something that they need. We need to create some kind of models how to do that, because at least in Helsinki it's been a big problem how basically young designers or their offices and can work with the public government, and you need somebody kind of a mediator or creating kind of ways of doing that. And there comes an interesting notion, because if you look Europe, we have quite regulated and homogeneous systems of how public sector buys services and goods. So all the solutions we find there actually can be replicated quite easily, because the legislation and rules are so same. So whatever there's a creative solution I'm interested in, I guess Helsinki is interested because it can be replicated. So that's an interesting point, that whatever you do, that kind of things are interesting. Second thing is that how the public sector functions is at least in theory homogeneous, the cultures are very different. So when you're working with the communities and how they are activating and what kind of civil societies there are, there comes then a big point, because something that might function in one city don't function at all in another city. And this is the thing, it's just there. So I think it's also important to develop the methodology and the kind of tools for doing it, and then each city and each community have to really look whether it works there or not, but this is maybe called prototyping. But the last thing is about what was very interesting about how the communities today function and how they're activated and what is sustainable. And I totally agree with the other friends here that the traditional top-down model is not only in crisis, but basically should have been disappeared already, because there are very few cases where traditional way of planning top-down and executing things top-down really functions. And one of the things what happened in Helsinki, and I don't know whether you already talked about it, is the phenomena called Restaurant Day. And that's very interesting. A year ago, some people decided that my dream has always been, they said, to have a restaurant, to provide something what I really like. And then they started to make a campaign of it in social media. And suddenly we had a new event in the city called the Restaurant Day. Now it's actually going global, so let's see whether it ends up your city too. Ravintolapäivä, there's that initiative. And it's very interesting if you study that. It came out as a social movement. People started to, it's called Ravintolapäivä, the restaurant day. Because what was the first, in last May was the first one, and last Sunday was the last one. It's one every season now. And it's not organized by basically anybody, but there's a group of people that are doing it. And then everybody on that day can put up a restaurant on your home, on your office, on the street, whatever, and sell food, cook and sell food, or drinks, or whatever. And when the first time was organized in a very organized Nordic society like this, the city had a very interesting decision to face. Suddenly they realized, oh God, now it's Tuesday. Next Sunday there will be 300 restaurants in this city. Nobody have applied any permission. There's no health checks. There's nothing. What to do? Well, of course, but I'm very happy about the decision makers in this very building, because they said, well, we cannot say no. You know, there are 1,000 people now out there doing this already, and they're advertising it, you know, in a social media. They're talking about it. There is a big fuss about it. So what they basically decided that we cannot change the rules. We cannot say no. So basically they decided that rules don't apply that day. and I think
the definition of Sunday.
Yeah, and that was a great decision by our city board and council, because they said, yes, all the rules are still there, and you must obey the rules, but there are no checks on that day. That was officially announced, that this is not going to be checked. And now it's already the fourth time, and this was bigger than ever. It has spread to other cities in Finland. It's spread abroad already within a year. But the key thing here is that it grew up of people, active people who wanted to do something, and within a few weeks it kind of occupied the whole city. And the city's role is not actually, is actually just to make it, let it happen and see it as a good thing for the city, let it roll. And now the first time, a few weeks ago, we had the first cleaning day. Yet again, the people's initiative. They went to the social media and say, let's take care of the city, let's clean our yards, and let's sell the things we won't need. So the whole city becomes a flea market for one day. And yet again, same decision. This is legal for one day. No checks, no other things. And you can sell, but just take the garbage out of you. You know, don't leave it on the streets. Take it back. They took it back because this is the interesting message too, because now when the message is sent, it said, yes, you can do it. The public kind of top-down approach, we allow it, but act so that it can be allowed the next time too. Don't screw it, basically. This was the message, and so far, so good. And actually, in the World Design Capital, we have a program called TACSI. It's an Aalto University student program when they decided to create a website for small communities where the idea is quite simple, to exchange things in a community. Which saying, Jussi here has a lawn, what is ruohonleikkuri? Lawn mower. I need one. I can go web and see Jussi has one. And Jussi said, yes, you can borrow it if you bring it back in the perfect shape. So I send a message to Jussi, and Jussi said 4 o'clock you can take it and give it back in the evening. So I go and take it, and then I give it back, and then I can also go back to the web and give my comments, and Jussi can give comments too, whether it's a good lawn, was it a good machine, or was Jussi happy about my thing. And this is now in use. They started that in the student community where people need a lot of things from each other. But you can borrow things, you can borrow space, you can borrow time in that website. So it's a very interesting phenomenon too.
The big plus on this is that you make contact. So it's not only the contact on the website, but you also visit each other, and maybe there will become friendships for life.
The idea is exactly the same, that you also learn who lives in your neighborhood and what they do.
We have lots of money, tax money tied into our system, which is decided in this building, how it's used. What's the connection between all these grassroots level things and the money? Should the money be used? Or this closed question. What's the role of money? Scaling up things. What is? I mean, because now the money is top down. The actions is bottom up. As I understood, Brenton, you don't have loads of money to go around, but if you would have, what would happen then? I mean,
I'm feeling uncomfortable. I think I'm here as just the money man. I'd like to say first, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I pick up the point about could you do this with people not paying their taxes? I would say to an extent you could. It's quite interesting. I mentioned earlier the work we've been doing with drug users in Hammersmith. That isn't just about treatment. That's about finding alternatives to custody as a punishment. So they effectively have to co-design their own punishment. It's not a soft option of simply getting them off drugs. So clearly there are limits to the extent to which you can give them a free rein to say, I'd rather not have anything at all, thank you very much. I'd rather just be left alone. But by involving them in elements of the design, you get a solution that works. So you say, it works only clearly with people who want to be helped to a large extent, but it does work. And it's been effective. The thing I'd like to say about the money, really, is it's the same principle. What you can't have, and I think is happening to some extent, is bottom-up design and top-down money. The money's got to come bottom-up as well. And I suppose there are two ways. I focused on one way of doing that. There are really, the way the UK is articulating this is, if it's a big service that needs to be done at scale, the way to move the money around is to try and articulate the outcomes that we think people don't want. If it's a smaller scale or wherever possible, it's the personal budget route. So you're trying to move the design of the service people want down and the way they choose to spend money. And there are numerous examples from where we've tried this today where it's quite effective in changing the balance of what's provided. Brenton talked about the example of someone who's only there to do the showering. We like to talk about the examples in the UK of where you can, if you give someone their own budget for care, you'll often find that their own carer, a relative or someone, can do the showering, but they can't do other things. They can't take them out, they can't walk the dog, they can't take them to a sporting event, and you can actually find different ways to spend the money. The issue is that the providers of services do tend to do it in that homogeneous way, and they could do that themselves. They wouldn't need to wait for the individual to do it. It's just, it doesn't happen that way. There are a number of areas where we're trying to push it further, but interestingly, even that the person by now, I think if the last government's objectives have been achieved, something like 2/3 of all budgets for care would have been devolved to individuals. But it hasn't happened anything like that quickly, precisely because of the same top-down view that we know best, that those who provide the service say, we don't want to give people that control because they won't know what to do with it, so it doesn't happen.
I'm just wondering, this is an interesting point that bottom-up things and then money comes top-down. Is there something to do with how actually the money is collected, following your idea of the taxes? Because in Helsinki and Finland, the system is so that the municipal tax is the biggest tax. We all pay municipal as a direct income tax. So you can follow your own money. You know, the money used in the municipalities is raised from the local people. It's not coming from the government budget. Actually, Helsinki is paying to the government budget because government thinks that Helsinki has too many good taxpayers. But all the local services and infrastructure is funded by money collected locally, and everybody pays a local income tax. So this discussion is makes a bit different discussion, but I can guarantee you it doesn't make it any easier. It's even more difficult when people say it's my money. I want to decide better how to use my money here locally. But it affects the discussion of how the money flows, and what's top down and what's bottom up, because in a local municipal tax, then the money is bottom up. Very much so.
Can I just quickly... I would like
I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I just say it that way.
I would like to raise a question. Vito Oragem Design Center, Essen, Germany. Because we're here of the design-led innovation, so we are normally talking on design and the question of the design process in these cases. Well, from Antoinette, we heard the role of designers in Eindhoven, but what about Neil and Brenton? You showed us two pictures of two designers in your team, but I didn't catch the point. How the designers go into the process, what do they do, what is their role, responsibility, what is the outcome of the cooperation with the designers in these concrete cases?
Sure. The design, so in the first project, Family by Family, there was a team of 3. There was a designer, originally an industrial designer, who then became a service designer, and now probably would describe himself as a social designer, a sociologist, and a social worker. Sounds like the start of a bad joke. You know, the team worked very much as a blended team. So it wasn't like you had the designer sitting over here and actually just doing the, you know, making the nice slides and designing the materials. It was integral to every piece of the process, from going out and doing the ethnographic work and helping build understanding in the rest of the team about how you do observation, and really understand what people's drivers and needs are, based on observation rather than based on what they might tell you in a survey, through to the ideation process and thinking about how you can take some insights about people's behaviour and try and design interactions that would shift people's behaviour from state A to state B, and then in the prototyping phase to actually, or A, create the interaction, but B, to again, to observe and to help iterate that process. So Chris, who was the lead designer on Family by Family, would take sort of primary responsibility for looking at what was working and what wasn't and helping to tweak that. But the fact is, and I'm sure they would want to say this, it's very much a blended team. It's not, you can't carve up the tasks. Since we've got the larger team, I do know that some of the times the designers do get the job of, you know, making the material pretty and the slides pretty. But if that's done to excess, then they get very upset, because for them, they very much came on board to be part of a team where they actually operate right across the spectrum. And so what we find is the process is a very deliberative process. There's a lot of team discussions about what they collectively think, what they're seeing, and what possibilities might emerge, and then they draw on the various, both the disciplines, but also their professional and other lived experience about what might be different. I'm not sure if that kind of got to the heart of your question. There isn't any easy answer. It's not, oh, they did sort of tasks 1, 5, and 7. The fact was they bring a sensibility to our work, just as social scientists bring, you know, the sociologist brings a sensibility to our work, just as the community development people bring a different kind of sensibility. And I think the power of kind of what we generate is the fact that it blends all of those different approaches, that we come up with interactions that work, that are grounded in sort of social science, that actually understand the way communities work, and that we can pay for it. And I think if we do that, we'll come up with solutions that are sustainable.
Hello, my name is Carl Smittberg. I'm coming from Stockholm. And first I had a reflection that I work as a communication manager, and it was music in my ear to hear that you want to have dialogue, talk to people, and go out with the public. But I understand also that it can be quite hard, because the advisors within the administrations, within the municipalities, are often seen as the experts and look at themselves as experts, and suddenly you go and tell them, you're not expert, we need to ask people. It can be a conflict, I guess. With that said, I want to ask, how do we make people that we ask think outside the box to be innovative? Because if you if you live in a society, you have your life, how to think, how could it be instead? How to put the question so people start to think, how can it be instead of being like this? And also, I think that we often, from the public sector, want to have so many requirements on agreements with companies and so on. So if the panel have any reflections about how agreements can be made so it's still places for innovation, so that companies can and designers can come with new ideas. Thank you.
I'll tackle the first one, and I might leave others to respond to the second. I mean, I think, and you know, it comes back to the epiphany that I mentioned in my talk. I think the real power in these methods is it actually breaks down, or it goes around, I think, the disappointment that we currently face in our standard models of public consultation. That is, politicians or public servants go out and they ask people what they want. They either get a whole list of things that may or may not be useful or feasible or sensible. They then maybe pick a few or maybe don't pick any. And then the public gets frustrated that they say, well, you asked me, I told you, and you haven't done it. The way we work, it's not going out just to ask people, you know, what would you like, or going out and asking them, what ideas do you have? It's actually going out and just trying to understand what their life is like and what might make it better. So when we started the family project, we said, look, we want to talk about family stress. What's your experience with family stress? What sorts of things get in the way of you sort of, you know, having the kind of good family life that you would like? And so we weren't jumping to like solution mode, we just wanted to understand. And by getting that really rich understanding, that enabled us to come up with some preliminary hunches that we then went out to people and said, well, look, here's an early idea, what do you think about this? And they said they thought it was rubbish, and so we changed it. And then over time, it became less and less rubbish and started to be a little bit good. This is a really, really fundamentally different way of trying to get to public policy solutions. And I think there's a huge opportunity to do this in a different way. I certainly know in the Australian context, there is a huge amount of dissatisfaction in the community about the way, you know, standard consultation processes work. And they say, well, we say something and you never listen. And the public servant response is, well, we asked and you gave us crazy ideas we can never implement. So everyone's kind of doing that. And actually, I think what this co-design approach enables us to do is to create a little bit more of a fertile space to get beyond just you know, it's replacing a ask-answer with a conversation and a dialogue and an attempt to try and build something up.
Yeah, I think the word dialogue is really important for different reasons. First, you mentioned, to go back to what you mentioned before, the blended teams. You know, I think this is key to large-scale or radical innovation, however you call it. You know, the few studies of the very successful radical innovation, large-scale change, show that it's a matter of people who decide to spend time together, no matter their expertise. I mean, the expertise is on the top of the thing, but they do spend time together. They do embrace the vision of the other, not the competence of the other, but the vision of the other on the problem. That's the first thing. And I think it's pretty much the value also of these long-term, you know, interaction, physical interaction, you know, where you go and visit the people and you talk with them and you allow them to talk to you, not to answer a questionnaire, but to talk about the dog as well, and to and where you can bring a cake, you know, next time, and maybe, you know, walk out with them and meet them in the park. And you decide that you don't have one figure, you have a person. And also you behave like a person. I want to stress that because, at least in France, when you have trouble in a small city or in a neighborhood or in a village, you decide, okay, this is just going nuts. Well, you usually send the police first, you send the social services next, or sometimes you send the social services and then the police. And then when it's all broken, you send the artists. And I've always been wondering, why the hell do you send artists in residence in the worst places? And because I have a few friends who are doing that, it's not that you send any artist. It's the only people who have chosen to take control of the time of their life. And therefore, they don't care whether they spend 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. They are there, they sit with the other people, they are not in representation. They stand naked with what they're doing. They play, they play pétanque, for instance. Or they come up and talk with teenagers in the park. And that is the reason why they can fix the social problem. It's the time, because their time is valueless. They have decided that their time is valueless. And one last point I would like to make based on what you're saying. I said before that the government might have a normative view of the ideal society, but I do think it is important. It might be a bit frustrating when it becomes very prescriptive, when it says you have to do this and that at that time of the day, and that's actually what is happening. But at the same time, it's also what prevents individual craziness, individual neurosis to become the rule of the world. We also need someone, an overarching regulation to say, well, you don't do that, you simply don't do that. And I think the dialogue you were mentioning is a way of making the representation get closer. Like, well, I would like this to happen. And then you say, but this cannot really happen. Imagine if everyone was doing the same or asking for the same. Okay.
Pekka, sorry, we are missing one component in the discussion. We still have one case to be presented. The Director of Elderly Services, Arja Peiponen, arrived to share us about what's been going on in Helsinki. Particularly, she will bring out about the new role of the worker at the customer interface. Is the worker artist? I don't know. We will hear soon. So please, Arja. And we continue with the panel, but please take a seat on the meanwhile. It's nice of you. And then after Arja's presentation, we continue with that.